Free Walk TLV.
Free Walk TLV.
Discover Tel Aviv
like a local.
Imagine this. Just 67 words. A single letter. Easily lost in history, right? But this one letter, well, it triggered a chain reaction that fundamentally altered the Middle East.
It really did.
And that's what we're getting into today on the Deep Dive. We're looking closely at the Balfour Declaration, where it came from, and the really significant role the Rothschild family played.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. Our sources for this are quite interesting, too.
Exactly. We're drawing on a recent interview with the fourth Lord Rothschild, Jacob Rothschild, talking about the Declaration, and also historical accounts of Edmond James de Rothschild, another key family figure.
His contributions were immense, especially on the ground.
So our mission here for you listening is to unpack this declaration, understand the motivations swirling around it, and really grasp how the Rothschilds were involved in those very early stages of what would eventually become Israel.
We've got those two main angles. The fourth Lord Rothschild reflecting on the declaration itself, and then the story of Edmond James de Rothschild's, foundational support for the first Jewish communities in Palestine.
Right. Let's start with the declaration itself.
Okay. It's amazing how this short document, the Balfour Declaration, sits right at this nexus of huge political forces and, very personal commitments.
And it was addressed to whom again?
It's addressed to the second Lord Rothschild, Walter. That's the current Lord Rothschild's great uncle.
Walter Rothschild. Wasn't he the one famously obsessed with birds and zoology?
He was. Primarily known for ornithology, yes. Which makes you wonder, why him? Why send this incredibly sensitive political statement to him?
Yeah, seems a bit strange.
Well, the fourth Lord Rothschild offered some insight on this. Yeah. He suggested that the Zionist movement, this push for a Jewish homeland, mainly starting in Eastern Europe because of, rising anti-Semitism, it didn't really have a single obvious leader within Britain itself.
Ah, okay. No central figure there.
Exactly. And the Rothschilds were arguably the most prominent British Jewish family. So Walter, despite his other interests, became involved in Zionism later on, and his family name carried enormous weight. It made him a perhaps unexpected but logical point of contact.
So 1917, the British government needs an addressee within the prominent Jewish community for this major statement, and they land on Lord Walter Rothschild, the ornithologist, partly because of his family standing and the lack of another clear leader.
It seems that way. It shows how influence worked back then, doesn't it? Kind of fluid.
It really does. So this declaration, just 67 words, what did it actually say? It's probably crucial to hear the wording.
Absolutely. The fourth Lord Rothschild actually read from a copy in the interview. It went, His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people.
Okay, view with favor. That's quite deliberate language.
Very. It continues. And will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. Then comes a really important part. It being clearly understood that nothing should be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine.
Right. That's the crucial balancing act attempt.
Precisely. And it finishes,
Yeah.
or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country.
So national home, best endeavors, but also these provisos about existing populations and Jews elsewhere. Hearing it like that really highlights the tightrope they were trying to walk.
Definitely. And you can understand why the fourth Lord Rothschild called it one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of Jewish people, coming after, 3,000 years of diaspora. The weight of that statement was immense.
Yeah, you can feel that sense of historical significance.
And this connects to the wider Rothschild involvement, which the fourth Lord Rothschild emphasized. They weren't just the recipients of the letter, kind of leading the Jewish diaspora in that sense.
What else were they doing?
They were also deeply involved in actually supporting the early pioneer communities setting up in Palestine. Which brings us to people like Dorothy de Rothschild Dolly, as she was known, and of course, Edmond James de Rothschild.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Moving from the diplomatic level down to the individuals driving things forward. Tell us about Dorothy. She married young, didn't she?
Very young, just 17 when she married her cousin Jimmy. And what's remarkable is how quickly and how passionately she threw herself into the Zionist cause.
At 17, what drove that?
Well, her husband Jimmy, who was Baron Edmund's son, was deeply committed, so she was likely influenced by him. But she wasn't just, passively supportive. Amazingly, even as a teenager, she acted as a crucial link, a go-between, is the term used for Chaim Weizmann.
Chaim Weizmann, the major Zionist leader.
The very same. Pretty extraordinary young woman facilitating things at that level.
A teenage go-between. That's pretty incredible. How did she manage that?
Yeah.
Connecting Weizmann with the sort of British corridors of power?
The evidence is actually there in the archives. Letters between Dorothy and James, her husband, and also letters between her and Weizmann from when she was still a teenager.
Wow. What do they show?
They show her giving Weizmann quite strategic advice, arranging critical meetings for him, basically helping him understand and navigate the nuances of British society and politics. The fourth Lord Rothschild even suggested she was involved in sort of training Weizmann.
Training him, like how to fit in, how to make his case effectively.
Something like that, yes. How to engage with the establishment. It really makes you think about how these informal networks and, frankly, personal skills can shape huge historical events.
So Dorothy wasn't just committed, she was strategically sharp, playing this almost hidden role connecting Zionist goals with British political reality, a powerful individual effort.
Absolutely. Now let's shift to another towering figure in the family, Edmond James de Rothschild.
Right. His nicknames alone tell a story. Hanadiv, the generous one, and father of the Yishuv, the pre-state Jewish community.
Exactly. Edmond, born into the French side of the banking dynasty, was deeply shaken by the pogroms in Russia in the early 1880s, the Negev Storms.
The pogroms, a key motivator then.
A huge motivator. It convinced him that the only real long-term solution for Jews facing persecution in the diaspora was immigration to Eretz Israel, the land of Israel.
So his approach was different from the political track leading to Balfour.
Very different, yes. While you had the diplomacy and Dorothy's networking, Edmund's contribution was about massive, direct philanthropic support. He focused on establishing and nurturing the very first Jewish agricultural settlements. It was practical, on-the-ground building.
So he wasn't just giving money for relief, he was investing in a future there.
Precisely. A long-term vision. He became the main backer for settlements you might recognize, like Zikron Yaakov, Rishon LeZion, Petah Tikva, the real early ones.
And he was personally involved.
Deeply. He visited Palestine 5 times, starting way back in 1887. He wasn't just writing checks from Paris. He funded agricultural training, vital skills, set up public services, gave allowances directly to settlers, and was crucial in buying land.
Wow, that's comprehensive.
He understood they needed the whole package,
Yeah.
the skills, the infrastructure, not just cash, to actually survive and hopefully thrive.
It sounds less like charity and more like, well, nation-building infrastructure investment,
Yeah.
agriculture, industry, even wine, the source mentioned.
Yes, his support laid the foundations for much of Israel's later agricultural and industrial development, including the modern wine industry. It was transformative.
A huge legacy.
Undeniably. So much so that in 1929, the World Zionist Organization named him honorary chairman. And in a very symbolic gesture after his death, his and his wife's remains were moved to Israel in 1954, buried in the land he helped shape.
Okay, so let's piece this together. We have the Balfour Declaration, this major political statement received by Walter Rothschild in Britain.
Right, the political recognition side.
And happening alongside that, for decades really, you have Edmond James de Rothschild from the French branch pouring immense resources and personal effort into building the actual physical and economic foundations for a Jewish presence in Palestine.
Exactly. It's like 2 parallel streams within the same family, both flowing towards, well, a similar outcome, though approached very differently.
It wasn't just a political declaration appearing out of nowhere. It landed in a context where this family was already deeply multi-generationally involved, both politically and practically.
And that raises a really interesting point, doesn't it? What does this tell us? You have one family involved over generations, using both political clout and massive philanthropy. Different methods, same broad direction.
It highlights that history isn't just one thing. It's not just declarations or just groundwork. It's the interplay. The Balfour Declaration needed something to declare support for.
Precisely. It needed the reality that people like Edmund were helping to create. And figures like Dorothy were essential in, kind of, bridging those worlds, the political aspiration and the on-the-ground reality. Personal connections making a huge difference.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, it's clear the Balfour Declaration was pivotal. A short letter received by a Rothschild carrying immense weight.
A major landmark, no question.
But it wasn't the whole story. The Rothschild family's role was multifaceted. They were the recipients of this key political nod, yes, but they were also, through figures like Edmund, the architects of the very foundations being built, through philanthropy and direct engagement, and through Dorothy, the connectors.
It's a powerful illustration of how different forms of influence can converge.
And maybe the final thought for you listening is about that very power, the power of individuals and families to genuinely steer history. When you look at this complex mix, the politics, the pogroms driving people like Edmond, the dedication of someone like Dorothy, the weight of the family name, what does it tell us about how history gets made?
Right. And what are the long-term ripples of these moments, these actions? How do the choices made by individuals decades or even a century ago continue to shape our world? It really encourages you to think about the different perspectives, the motivations, and just how relevant this history remains today.
Free Walk TLV.
Free Walk TLV.
Discover Tel Aviv like a local.
Discover Tel Aviv like a local.